Your eyes look great.
Thanks. This is upsetting because I don't get to see your quads, man. Like I was gonna actually make you do like a thing.
Well, I'm wearing pants today. Normally I wear my shorts,
Not
so
okay. I think you'll. I wore this shirt though on purpose for you.
let me read it backwards. Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, man.
Hell yeah,
I
babe.
know you dig me on that one.
Yep, 1000%. How are you, man?
Man, I'm good, man. It's amazing. It's how long has Real Coaches Summit been? How long has that been since we were there?
March. That was in March, right? So April, 2 months probably.
Yeah, yeah, like 6 weeks. It feels like a lot longer.
Yeah, yeah.
It
Holy
feels
shit.
it feels like a lot longer. Well, man, this is my first live in quite a while. Coming back in hot, just work. I've been working on some back end business stuff. You know that
Hmm.
game.
I'm honored.
And so it's you and then Mike T. Nelson.
Oh, cool. I don't know
That
who
guy's
Mike is,
smart.
but it's always good to interview smarter people.
That's why I interview people because pretty much everyone that I interview is smarter than I
Same
am. So
here. We're in the same boat. You drinking your afternoon coffee right now?
yeah, man. Can you read it? It's backwards.
Hold on, lift it up higher. Donuts, baby. I
Says,
can't read the top.
uh, abs are great, but have you tried donuts?
I love that too.
Yeah. My coffee mug game is not on BD Carpenter's level, but I'll get there.
I've never had coffee before. Did you know
Say
that?
what?
I've never had coffee before. It's never touched the lips. Yeah. Do you want to end this interview now? Yeah. It's like my icebreaker with everyone.
I got nothing. Like I was
Let
like,
it
do I
sink
sit here
in.
and keep drinking my coffee? Like I don't understand. Well, this one is in fact like a creme brulee flavored with
Ooh.
sugar-free caramel and Fairlife skim milk.
Wow. That
Yeah,
sounds good.
yeah, yeah, man. I'm not on quite as much coffee right now as I was at the Real Coaches Summit, so I can hold a real conversation.
You were definitely hyper at Coach's
Bro,
Real Coaches Summit.
it was it was like I think I had 2 hours of sleep on the way there. I was up for 21 hours the first day, and then from then it was just like, with the time change coming from the East Coast, it was like I was just living on lavender lattes.
I've never heard of a lavender latte. That sounds great.
It's a great way to break. Like if you're gonna ever have coffee, that's a great way to start,
Yeah,
right?
like a tasty, interesting flavor coffee.
It's it's a weird juxtaposition. I bet you didn't
Yeah,
expect to hear that word
I
today,
didn't.
but it's like lavender is soothing, milk is soothing,
Hmm.
and then a lot of times I'll get honey, that's soothing, and then but you get this very soothing beverage, but then you end up hyper, and it makes no sense whatsoever.
So you're like, I feel soothing, and now I have a crap ton of energy.
Yeah, and usually in the morning when I'm drinking mine, I'm like reading my Bible, and so I'm like, oh man, I'm very centered. This is very soothing, and then I'll like run through a wall. And like what? So, dude, let's get into it, man. One of the things I really respect about you, not just as a coach, but as a human being, is the fact that you're very open and vulnerable about the things your life and the things you're going through.
Mm,
Um,
thank you.
and as you've looked at my page, and if you've ever listened to podcasts, I'm out there with it. Because so many people think that we have our crap together. Like, no, we just have our crap together with like being in shape.
Yeah, pretty much. It's a good way to point it. True.
Right? I'm with Amanda here. Like, is there a reason? The people want to know. Inquiring minds, like, why?
Why do we have our shit together with working
No, she
out?
said, is there a reason you've never tried coffee?
Oh.
And I don't know Amanda, but I'm with her. You know?
It's, at this point in my life, there's zero reason. It was the combination. My mom told me it would stunt my growth growing up, and I needed all the height I can get at 5'6". And then it became like, well, so many people seem reliant on it. Like they're like, I need my coffee to start my day or like to get to neutral. So I was like, well, I don't really like that. And then they're like, it stains your teeth, and I was like, well, I really like my teeth when they're white. So I was like, but to be fair, I love the idea of coffee. Like I like the idea of like a morning ritual or sitting down with somebody, having a nice conversation, like sipping something warm. It's just in my case, it's either been hot chocolate or tea. But I plan on having it one day
Maybe we
for
can like ease you in with decaf. You know what I mean?
yeah, you could. I think I'd rather go full fledged
Well,
if I do it.
if we look at the controlled trials, we see that people that have like 1 to 2 cups a day, like they have a healthier heart and liver. So we can just go with that. So,
Yeah. Hey, well
um,
then sign me up for the next one.
yeah. But so the reason I called this sources over symptoms, and I think is so often people feel, with lonely, and
Yeah.
it's okay. But what's the source?
Mm.
One of the things that I work with the most is emotional eating and stress eating. And that's typically a symptom. As a recovered alcoholic drug addict, symptoms.
Mm.
So what led you to start sharing that your struggles, but then you're in therapy? Like,
Mm.
let's just freewheel it from here. But what led you to want to be that vulnerable?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a really good question. And like right off the bat, I'll say like my favorite quality in anybody is vulnerability and communication. Like those are the two biggest values I love in any person. For me, it was going through like a rock bottom moment. Like I was struggling with anxiety and depression for years, and I was kind of just going through the motions of it, and it just led me to a place, and literally like it gives me chills every time I tell this story. But I remember just being in the gym I was training at, I was working out, and there was this guy I used to, either work out with sometimes, or he was just like a gym regular, and you always say hi, all that. Um, and he was actually like, and I love how much you share your faith, but he was also a very, faith leading person. So he's always be like, God bless, God's watching over all these stuff, right? And he just comes up to me randomly, and he just goes, "Hey, I can tell you're struggling a lot, and you're not doing so well." He goes, "I just want you to know you're going to be okay." And that's kind of like what launched me into being like, well, one, like after he left, I burst into tears in the middle of the gym. I was just like crying. I was just like, it was a moment of that I recognize now of just feeling very seen and feeling that my facade that I was putting on for everyone else was was now see through, right? And that was it was like that dichotomy of, wow, this person sees me and can see I'm hurting, while also like, holy shit, like this facade I'm putting up is now falling apart, right? It's like you can't hold this up anymore. And for me, that was my trigger to be like, all right, let me go into therapy. And I had been into therapy as a teenager when my parents divorced, so I was familiar with it, and I had like a feeling like, oh, I've always known this was helpful. It helped me back then, but it had been years since I had been back, like probably almost 10 years. And so for me, it was that rock bottom moment. It was that person seeing me that my family hadn't even seen, like that I was struggling. They didn't know I was struggling. How could they? Like you put on a smile all the time, you say everything's fine, like, and you don't communicate how you're feeling. Like how are other people supposed to know? But this person who barely even knew me could tell. And that was my moment to be like, I need to seek out help. I need to ask for help, right? And that moment I recognize now was one of my greatest strengths, was being able to be like, I need help, right? That is a huge strength that I see in other people now. And it was from that moment on, like when I started going to therapy and I started breaking down, the roots of things, like we talked about, like the sources, not just the symptoms, right? Because initially I was like, oh, like I was going through a breakup, and I was struggling with this, struggling with that. But then it got to like, oh, your anxiety stems from your childhood, your depression stems from this because you didn't grieve through friends who passed away or family members who passed away, and then oh, you have a lot of anxiety because you never had hard conversations with people, or you have a lot of anxiety because you never speak how you're feeling, right? And it all felt very like, I'm a very emotional person, but when you don't communicate your emotions, then all that emotion just stays underneath and it kind of boils like a volcano, right? Until it erupts, right? So for me, it was going to therapy and then recognizing that I'm going to be in the same patterns and the same position if I don't communicate to people what I'm going through or what I'm feeling. And it was something where I felt a lot of resistance with at first, because I think I felt like even back then, like this was like 6 years ago when I started going to therapy. Back then, there was still a large stigma for anybody to go to therapy, especially men. And to communicate that, it almost felt like you were holding up the white flag, just being like, I am losing this war, like something's wrong with me, right? But for me, I very quickly realized that, like this is a strength, and this is something I need to talk more about, because just how some random person was able to, pick my life apart in front of me, like I need to be able to bring this awareness to others and say like, hey, I'm going to therapy. This is what I'm struggling with. And because that was progress for me too, right? Like we often make posts on our socials about things we're struggling with, because, or lessons that other people need to learn, but it's really us who are like, hey, this is what I'm going through right now. Hopefully it helps you. And yeah, so that's kind of what prompted me to start talking about therapy more, was actually being in it and realizing that the stigma was really putting a plug into vulnerability as a whole for everyone. And I wasn't trying to be an advocate. I was really just doing it for myself, because I realized that if I didn't speak about it more and communicate it more, then I was going to stay in the same place.
It's beautiful and powerful. And I really appreciate you sharing that. And it's interesting how some people can see straight through us, and other people that have known us forever don't actually really know us.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now you mentioned something. You mentioned masks.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that we all struggle with, right? Lewis Howes put out a book, The Masks of Masculinity. And I don't know if you've read it, but it's phenomenal. And it goes through the different masks that we wear, whether it's the athlete, whether it's the Joker, the sexual mask, right? The different masks and what they are and what they're trying to cover. And it's very, very powerful. When you actually did ask for help, what did you feel? Did you feel, you thought you might feel weak, it sounded like, but how did you actually start to feel when you asked for help? And what has it allowed you to accomplish? Because I know you're still going through it.
Yeah, yeah. So to answer the question first is, it's one of those things, anytime I've leaned into sort of what my gut or my intuition was telling me, I've always felt like a wave of peace and lightness, right? Like that's always my sign, like, hey, you're on the right track with this, right? Like you are in your flow state. You're following your intuition, right? Some people call it God, some people call it the spirit, whatever you want to call it. But like for me, it was like whenever I feel that, I'm like, this is where I'm supposed to be. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. And so that was sort of my guiding light, and what I felt like when I asked for help was I felt peace, also knowing like that I have a lot of work to do, right? So it was like peace with the awareness that, hey, this is we're just getting started with this, right? And then yeah, I mean, I think that's why I've taken breaks from therapy occasionally, like you know, whether it's for because work comes up or you're in different seasons of life. But I've always kind of had a we'll call it appointment in some ways. Like I've always stayed plugged into therapy, because I'm very much of the mindset where it's like I like it for accountability. I liken it to a checkup with a doctor, like getting your blood work done, all that stuff. Because for me, it's just really important to, one, just have somebody I can express myself who's going to give me a very unbiased opinion, I think that is something that most of us don't have, right? You have your best friends who can be there for you mentally. You have a spouse, a partner, anybody, right? But to have a person whose literal job is to listen to you, to dissect your thoughts, and to provide you with unbiased feedback based on what you're saying and based on your physical mannerisms, all these things that they're breaking down as you're talking. I think that is incredibly important because it gives you that neutral soundboard to hear feedback, whether it's a hey, you need to you got to get your shit together, or it's a very hey, like you're being way too hard on yourself, right? Like I've had multiple sessions, like literally in the last like 2 weeks I've had a session where it was like, get your shit together. This is your pattern. Identify that and take off your rose-colored glasses. Like stop glamorizing this, stop glamorizing that. And also I've had where it's like you are way too self-critical and you're always on this. Like my most recent session with my therapist was just like you're always on a path for growth. You're always trying to learn. She goes, but because of that, at the same time, you're very self-critical in that way to the point where, and we know like there's a balance between everything. There's the balance between I need to grow because I know that I have a path that I'm on, that I have things I want to achieve. There's people I want to serve. There's mindsets I believe will be best for me with what I'm trying to do. But then at the same time, it's like if I'm always criticizing every step I'm taking along that journey, then it becomes an unhealthy balance. Right. And I think it's always, and again, I wouldn't have realized that if it wasn't for an unbiased person being like, hey, you're being an asshole to yourself, or hey, like you got to give yourself more grace here, or you need to call yourself out here because this is the exact same patterns you had a year or two ago that you just need to, 360 view and see it again.
And it's everything you just said. Yeah, it's interesting how the lack of a journey in someone to pursue personal growth can cause massive anxiety. Whereas the constant growth journey for personal growth can also cause anxiety.
Yeah.
And it's finding that healthy balance, and the balance may not always be the same.
Yeah.
And I call it the BS bell curve.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because we all feel anxiety, right? But anxiety has been given such a negative connotation these days. And anxiety is not a bad thing. Anxiety is simply your brain saying something needs to change.
Yeah.
The problem is when we don't change it, then the chronic elevated anxiety becomes the problem.
Yeah.
And that's where we go into the symptoms over sources. And we often look and say, but I'm feeling anxiety, but that's a symptom of something in your life that needs to change.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
absolutely.
I'm very science-based. We've spoken, but I support it with scripture. And scripturally speaking, it is, and I think you'll like this, you can't put new wine into an old wineskin because it'll burst. And so often we're constantly trying to, if we're looking at it from a nutrition standpoint, well, this diet will work. That's new wine into an old wineskin. You haven't fixed the source of the problem yet.
Yeah.
This new relationship, this girl or this guy will fix it. And I think that that's just very, very profound because we develop these coping mechanisms, right? And I actually love it when somebody says, I've developed healthy coping mechanisms. Interesting. And it'll just be a question, like, why do you say that? Okay. Because coping is another way of saying you haven't actually handled it yet.
Yeah. That's a good point.
And when we walk through life with coping mechanisms, that's another way of saying I'm limping through life.
Yeah.
And just like a dog that you see that's limping around. He's done it for so long, he doesn't even realize he's limping anymore.
True. Yeah.
And it's just interesting, and I love therapy. I will never stop going. I've been going for over a decade.
Mm.
And it's very interesting because we look at it when we treat things with. I have a client who's come off of you and I talked about this client recently.
Yeah.
Who's going after this horses now, and it's brutal. But what happens when you just give Medicaid, SSRIs, benzos, things like that?
Mm.
The wound is still festering. And therapy is going after the wound. It's going after the source. And so many people, I think, need to hear this message, but I don't know if anybody said this to you lately, but I'm going to say it, man. I'm proud of you for doing the work.
Thank you, brother. I do appreciate that. Yeah.
And it's not talked about enough in the industry.
Yeah. I think you're right. And I think there's a few things you said that definitely resonate. I think one where you said anxiety is sort of like I mean, that's kind of why I wear a compass necklace. I still don't know if you could see me on Instagram Live, but I have a necklace that's a compass, and it's basically just like like you're being guided at all times to like lean into what you're feeling because that's going to give you direction, right? And so I'll say like anxiety can also, yes, it can be a compass, but I think also it's just sometimes it's at least what I've learned recently. Sometimes it's just giving yourself that space to feel, right? And sometimes that's all we need. Because like I said, that random person in the gym who came up to me and made me feel seen, sometimes that's what we need for ourselves. We just need to give ourselves the space to see ourselves and what we're experiencing. Because something I've realized lately is when I sit with this anxiety more often, it doesn't last as long, right? It's almost like a kid who comes up to you crying, and what we tend to do is with our anxiety, we say, no, come back to me when you're smiling, come back to me when you're happy, right? And what does that do to that kid? Like they don't feel seen, it doesn't solve the problem. But when you actually sit with that kid and you don't even have to give them advice, just sit with them, let them cry, let them, voice their frustration, then it resolves the problem, right? Or at least allows them to feel like, oh, like it's okay to feel these things, right? And I think that's what I realized too when it comes to anxiety lately or any other feeling is like, hey, sit with it. What is it that you need? Sometimes it's just recognizing and letting you know I'm here and I'm with you and it's going to be okay. Other times, like you said, it's direction. It's like if I'm getting anxiety from working with somebody, if I'm getting anxiety from a certain activity, it's like, well, this is telling me I don't want to do this, right? I'm not supposed to be in this right now. And I think, and then there's also other anxieties where I'm getting anxiety because I'm really excited about this opportunity. And it's a lot of energy I'm feeling because I want this to go well because I've been working for this, right? So there's different types that gives us different directions. And sometimes it's just to be seen. Sometimes it is for our compass. And I do think it is powerful when you start to realize that you have this ability, we all have this ability just to give ourselves the space to feel and to learn in order for us to recognize what our next step is.
I freaking love it and agree wholeheartedly. There are different forms of anxiety, and we have to sit in them. We have to understand them. And we look at the different ways when I hear somebody with FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. Very often the thing they're missing out on is time in silence with themselves. Like, what are you running from?
Yeah.
And how are you supposed to take the next step if you're looking backwards or not even with your eyes open? And it's understanding, like, what am I feeling? What am I actually anxious about? Like, if you're hiding in Thin Mints, you're still not letting yourself feel it. You're only feeling part of the emotion. And then in the process, creating another one of guilt or shame.
Right.
And And so I just think that that's very profound. Just understanding, like, what form of anxiety am I feeling? Am I feeling the anxiety of this is wrong? Am I feeling the anxiety of I'm excited? Am I feeling the anxiety of something needs to change? Am I feeling the anxiety of, wait a minute, maybe my body just has too much pent up energy because I don't move and I don't walk enough?
Mm, hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I was gonna say, I think that is we. It's kind of like you were talking about before with coping. Is what are we what are we plugging our anxiety with so we don't have to feel, right? And like you said, you've had your journey and you've been sober now, and you've had all these amazing changes you made in your life to feel more and to learn more and move forward. And I think a lot of people tend to do that, whether it's with alcohol, whether it's with drugs, whether it's with sex, whether it is with food, right? And I think, and like you said, that the biggest thing that you can do is sit with it and also ask yourself why, right? I think that's the part that we all skip over or we resist because we're afraid of the answer that we may get, right? And I think that's we've all been there, right? Like we're all afraid of like, oh, what's on the other side of this, right?
Freedom.
And yeah, exactly, right, exactly. Freedom is on the other side of this, but it's scary because it means we have to shed our skin. It means we have to evolve. It means we have to leave this old version of us behind, which has become our comfort, right? And I think that is like the it is scary, right? It's like I've known this version of myself my whole life, and now this is causing me to question that and also know that I have to move forward and develop this next version of me, right? And I think that's when so many people kind of get stuck in their own ways because one, like you've heard this all the time probably with clients, is like they want this dream body, they want this ideal weight, they want this ideal relationship with food and all these things. But like when you tell them this is what it's going to take to get there, that's when they feel resistance, right? Because now you are presented with the opportunity to change everything you've ever known and who you are and what that looks like. And you're scared as fuck because that means you're going to have to evolve. That means you're going to have to leave this old version of yourself behind and let go, right? And something I've realized recently is letting go is a skill, right? Like letting go is not easy no matter what, whether it's a relationship, whether it's food, whether it's your old ego, whether it's that old version of yourself, whether it's a partner. Letting go is a skill that you have to master to understand that on the other side of what you're letting go of is this, like you said, it's freedom. It's that version of you always wanted but didn't really know if you can get there.
Yeah. It letting go is one of my key pillars. And it's pull your best frozen and let it go. And it's to find the version of you that you were always created to be.
Mhm.
And one of the biggest problems is people start to make their identity their struggles.
Yeah.
And whether it's I'm fat, I'm an alcoholic, I was abused, I was these things, that's something you went through. It's not who you are. And I think that when we can actually be honest with ourselves and say, this was actually never who I really was. This is not who God created me to be.
Mm.
It's what the world turned me into. But that real version of me is still there.
Mm.
And what if we pictured that anxiety as the real version of you, the little version, that little kid,
Mm.
the little Matthew, the little Ryan, the little Chrissy, the little Jennifer, the little whomever, in the trunk, kicking as hard as they can to get out. Going, does anybody see me? Can anybody hear me? Please let me out. Like, what if that's what the anxiety is? Hold on one second. Sally.
Sally's in the trunk, kicking and screaming.
Sally's getting crunk, dude. Yeah. So, like, right at the right moment, right where we're getting really heavy,
Yeah.
She's like, I too have anxiety, and little
That's
Sally's
right.
inside of me right now, kicking, you know? But it's, I mean, what if we just pictured it that way? And it's when we have these things that are very overwhelming, one of the tools that I use with my clients, I think you'll like this, man,
Mm.
is whether it's a trauma, whether it's life, whether it's fibromyalgia, whether it's the urge to go to that man or that woman that's not healthy, whatever it may be, this big overwhelming thing. I like to nickname it. I have my clients nickname it for several reasons, but my favorite is this. Did you ever see the cartoon Over the Hedge?
Yeah.
Do you remember when Hammy looks up at the hedge and he goes, let's call it Steve. It's a pretty name. Why did he name the hedge Steve?
You want me to answer?
Yeah. Have you ever thought of this?
Probably just to label his fear, label like the obstacle that he's trying to overcome.
And now it's not this omniscient, overpowerful thing.
Mm.
When we name it, it no longer is powerful. Like that anxiety, that trauma as a child is not God. It can't read your thoughts. We give our power to it.
Mm.
So when we name it, if you also look at an exorcism movie, right? They have to name the demon before they cast it out.
Yeah.
Because once you name it, it no longer holds power over you.
Mm.
But you have to identify it and name it before you can handle it.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think it's one of those other things too, where I think it's to go along with a demon. As I was recently watching The Nun, I think, and that's what kind of
Which one?
sparked that. The Nun. It was
Oh,
it's like,
dude, that movie's creepy.
oh, dude, it freaks me out. Especially since the Warrens are from my hometown in Connecticut, so I'm just like,
That's
too
why you
close
got
to home.
anxiety, bro. Like you
For
need
sure.
to call Ed and Lorraine,
I
son.
know.
Like,
Oh man, wild. But I think also to go along with that, like when you're able to label something, you also know you can come with it with the tools to overcome it, right? And I think that's really important. And I love how you have your clients nickname it. And another thing I like to use with my clients is like label the voice, because oftentimes I think we have these voices of who, you know, you're never going to lose this weight, or you don't look good in these photos or anything like that. Like oftentimes those voices are from other people in our lives who planted them there. And being able to pull that out and label the voice allows you to understand that's actually not my voice in my head. That is my mother's, or that is my old partner's, or that was this kid in high school who was a bully, right? It's like when you're able to pull that out and label it, it just makes you realize like, oh, that's not me, right? And that's not what I want, and that's not how I want to think. And like you said, it allows you to just process it better and to change your thoughts, right? So a quote I heard recently was, your thoughts are like clothes, right? You could change them at any time, right? So I think being able to recognize and pull and label these voices in our head and identify them, it allows us to get back to our peaceful state and realize like, oh, it's not what I want. That's not my voice. This is the journey I'm on. I can do this, right? And change the narrative of your thoughts going forward.
100%. Like all of these tools, one of the tools that I have my clients use to sit in it is, instead of going to food or booze or whatever they're going to for comfort, right? So instead of reaching for Thin Mints for comfort, I have them pause. And recently I had a client who her thing was actually Thin Mints. That's why I keep going back to that, because it's fresh in my mind. So she would go to Thin Mints for comfort. And let's be real, after the first two, you're not really tasting it.
Yeah.
Like you're just binging it. And they are binge worthy. I will give them that. But I had her journal. Like, what am I needing comfort from? What am I seeking comfort for? And in her journaling process, what she figured out was the reason her thing was Thin Mints is because that's what her mom used to give her when her dad was being a jerk.
Yeah.
So she had equated her mother's love, safety, and security to that Thin Mint, but it was never about the Thin Mint. Now her mother has since passed, but she's closest to her aunt. So now she calls her aunt instead.
Mm.
Like, and it's not about that client. It's what are you seeking comfort from? What is the anxiety coming from? When you sit in it, and what she also did was wrote her dad a letter.
I love that.
So we had her write a letter. I said, "Hey, is this something you would be willing to do? Would you be willing to write your dad a letter?" And she did. And she's written him, I think, 7 now. And it's hard. And that's the thing is, it's hard. And it sucks. And I'm going to tell you, like in my writing, my journaling, it's actually going to be published now.
Yeah.
I cried more probably writing this stuff than during when this stuff happened.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because it festers.
Yeah. It
And
definitely does.
we harbor this resentment toward things and toward ourselves versus, like, let's say you ticked me off and you never knew that you ticked me off, but I'm over here pissed off at you.
Mm-hmm.
But you're like, why is he mad at me, yo? Like, is it because I wore pants instead of short shorts? Like, what happened? But if I would have just talked to you, we could have worked through it. And the problem is we don't talk through ourselves and through our own stuff.
Yeah. That's so true. That's so true. And I think that is I have to hop off in a few minutes, but that is a really powerful tool to use. One, I think journaling in general is incredibly powerful. I think it's like I tune it to, we all have this beehive going on in our head, right? Especially the longer you haven't addressed your thoughts, your emotions, it's like a bunch of beehives, right? It's festering, it lasts. When you go to bed, you can't sleep, you're tossing and turning. That's why a lot of people say they can't shut their mind off when they go to sleep. It's because you haven't taken what's going on in your head and put it down somewhere else, right? And we talked about therapy as a tool for that. Meditation is a tool for that. Journaling is a huge tool for that. It's something I can relate to that. I've been journaling since I've been going to therapy. And it is one of those things that you're able to give yourself more clarity in your own mind when you can write down what's festering. And it's one of those things when you start journaling, you might not even know what's going to come out, right? I usually just start writing about my day and then like it floods, right? It's like a floodgate from there. And it is such a powerful tool to either, whether it's, for me, I actually wrote a letter to my ex in my journal, right? And that was very powerful because in the past that might have been me actually reaching out to them and then opening this door again. But in reality, I just needed to write down my thoughts and feelings as if I was talking to this person, and that was very cathartic, right? Mm-hmm. So oftentimes we can use these tools of journaling to help quiet that beehive and give us clarity, not avoid it. And then, like I said, a lot of clients who struggle with sleep, that's one of my first things I have them do, is because I'm just like, listen, like, if you're tossing and turning and you wake up in the middle of the night, like, it's probably stress related. Let's make sure you give yourself more time to let those thoughts process, so that by the time the end of the day comes, you can't sleep, right? I think that's the most important thing. I think that's the biggest sign for most people is as soon as you turn the lights off, you close the doors, you get into bed, that is the first time all day you've really been with yourself. You've really been still, right? And being still and having no distractions is now what's causing these floods of thoughts and emotions come to your head. And a lot of people think that's a negative thing, but it's just because it's the first time all day you've sat with yourself, right? And that's why we talk about all this today, how if I journal, if I go to therapy, if I meditate, even just sitting myself for 5 minutes, like allowing myself to process what I need to feel, that's going to give you so much more clarity and understanding and also direction, right? And I think that's the most important part when we're talking about all this is, where does this lead me, right? And like we said, sometimes it leads me to doing this more often, right? And that's going to allow me to be a better person, a better partner, a better coach, and a better servant to anybody who needs me in that moment.
I love that, man. And I know you got to run. I do too. If I may add one more,
yeah,
these things that we're doing, to your point, where if you lay down and your brain is going and it's just running, Put it on paper. That will actually allow it to escape from your brain and let you rest. So if your brain is waking you up in the middle of the night,
Yeah.
write it down first, and it allows it to escape, and I bet you'll sleep better.
Yep.
Right? It's not about more melatonin and more magnesium here. And you see it a lot, I know I do, where it's the booze or the ice cream or whatever at night. Well, it's my treat for myself. Well, no kidding. Because your whole day, especially the ladies that are superheroes, especially the moms, like your day was your kids, your job, your husband, your kids, your job, your husband. And the one gift you gave yourself was ice cream.
Right.
But it's not a very good gift that makes you feel guilt or shame. So what would be a good gift? Each coping mechanism, each tool that we have served us at some point. The question is it serving the person that you were created to be? And does it serve you moving forward?
Yeah.
And if the answer is no, then you're worth changing.
Right. No.
You're worth it. And the problem is, if we've been beaten down our whole life, no wonder we don't feel like we're worth it.
Yeah, it's just what you're used to, right? It's the standard you've been, we'll say, laid with or installed with, and that has defined your self-worth and why it's made your glass ceiling a lot shorter than others, right? And that is really important in terms of kind of what you said in that, you know, our the way that you cope, or like the ice cream that you might have, right? It is kind of one of those things that can make you feel good in the short term, but in the long term, it debilitates you, right? So I kind of liken it to like how much of your day is spent investing in your short term pleasure versus your long term pleasure, right? And I think that's the most important thing, is when the ratio is at least 60, 50, even 51-49, like long term, right? I think when you make those investments, that's when you're creating that future and you're creating that growth that you aspire for. But when there's more short-term investments for that pleasure, then that's what's kind of leading you down that same cycle of shame and guilt.
100%. I liken it to jail, like the movie Shawshank Redemption. If you look at most people when they get out of jail, they lack structure and they go right back in.
Yep, 1,000%.
And but the problem is the food, the alcohol, the drugs, the sex, those things are your own jail. We actually have the key. You don't have to keep going back.
Yep, absolutely.
Brother, I really appreciate your time. If you can leave everybody with one thought for the day, what would it be?
Yeah, well, I would say the best piece of advice that I was ever given was by my mentor when I was in high school. He's a 65-year-old strength coach at the time when I was in high school. His name was Carl Bodner. And he would kick my ass every workout. He'd give without kindness all the time. He used to train me for free for years to help me get better at football, and just installed me with so many life lessons. But the biggest quote he gave me, he said, "It's one thing to be nice, it's another thing to be kind." And that's something that is embedded in me, not only to give without asking for anything in return, but it's one thing to be nice, it's another thing to be kind. Because that just tells me, hey, when I'm kind, I'm being authentic, and my soul wants the best for you, right? And that's my interaction with you, right? Sometimes being nice is just, it's like small talk, right? It's not as deep. There's not much depth. But when there's kindness, then that's you giving your full self to somebody. So it's one thing to be nice. It's another thing to be kind.
To add on to that, to everybody that listens, we're good at doing that to others, but what about ourselves? So giving yourself the booze, the ice cream, the sex, whatever it may be nice to yourself, but are you being kind?
1,000%.
Brother, I really appreciate your time more than you know. I appreciate your friendship.
Love you, man. Thank you so much for having me on.
Bro.
Everybody.
And thanks to Aram for hosting our Real Coaches Summit, where we got to meet.
1,000. Hey, thanks for counting my quads. That's what hooked it in.
Beth, if you're still on here too, thanks for tuning in.
All
right,
buddy.
Brother, later.
Good.